Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host, Mark Philpott. My guest today was born in Switzerland. He has been riding his bike in the Alps there since he was 12 years old. In a previous life, he raced at an elite level and worked for 20 years for the UCI, the world's cycling governing body. In 2014, he decided to leave the corporate world behind to become a professional bike bum. So let's find out how that journey's been going for him. It's a very warm welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show to Mr. Alain Rumpf. So, Alain, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. It's very nice to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Whereabouts in the world are we talking to you from today?
Well, I'm in Switzerland, in the mountains. I live in a small village called Grillon in the French-speaking part of Switzerland.
Bonjour, then, to this French-speaking part of Switzerland today. And have you got a beautiful sunny day in the mountains today?
Not really, no. It's a very rainy day, which actually is not so bad because the weather forecast is for snow soon, maybe tonight or tomorrow, and I'm very excited because I love skiing, and it means that the skiing season is going to start soon.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's that time of the year in Europe, isn't it, when everybody gets excited about the oncoming of the ski season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I have to ask you, have you ever been on a podcast show before?
Yes, I have. I'm a big podcast fan. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I've been on one podcast in the past. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! And what are some of the podcasts that you listen to? What are the themes of the podcasts that you check out?
Well, it's a mix. Some are cycling podcasts because I'm a cyclist and I'm very passionate about the sports. So it's a great way to stay up to date with what's going on in the cycling world. Lots of interviews of inspiring people. They can be athletes, but not necessarily. I think podcast is fantastic because you can use your downtime, to learn things and be inspired. So great medium.
Are you somebody that goes out cycling and listens to podcasts when you're cycling along?
Not when I'm cycling, because I like to be connected to the outside world, when I ride my bike. Well, for safety, first of all, to hear the traffic around me, but also to be connected with nature. I like to hear what's going on around me. But when I go hiking or running, I do listen to podcasts, yeah.
I like to offer my guests the opportunity to dedicate this particular episode to somebody special in their lives. So who would you like to dedicate your episode today to in your life?
I would like to dedicate this to my wife, Lily, who is my biggest supporter in everything I do in life. And I would, many of the things I'm doing now I wouldn't be doing if it wasn't for her, and so I'm very, very thankful. So yeah, I dedicate this episode to Lily.
Well, that's fantastic, and this is something that you'll both have to listen back on in your future years. Now, I have to be very open and transparent with you because I spend a lot of my time online trying to find guests for my podcast show, and when I came across you online, I thought I've got to have this man on my show because I love cycling so much, and I want to have a good chat to somebody who loves cycling as probably as much as I do, and that was my selfish reason for getting you on the show today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go ahead, but that'll come out in our conversation. First of all, let's go back. I already said to my listeners when I did the introduction to the show that you started on a bicycle at a very young age. What inspired you to take up cycling? Was there somebody like a role model in your life in those early years that got you into cycling?
Yeah, kind of, actually, because, as a kid, I tried many different sports. In Switzerland, people in general are very active, and kids as well. So I tried soccer, I tried gymnastics, martial arts, and all sports that kids do at when they're like 10, 12 years old. But I was actually quite bad at all of them. And then when I was 11, I think one summer somehow I started following the Tour de France. I started following it on the radio. So every afternoon I would listen to the radio program from French radio, live from the roads of the Tour de France. And I don't know, I just loved it and got passionate about it, started riding my bike, around and just loving it. And the next, the year after, the spring after, my mom noticed that there was a cycling club in the town where I lived, and they had some training sessions for kids and asked me if I wanted to go. I said yes, and it was, it was love at first sight. I absolutely loved the sport, and I had found my thing really.
What was it that really connected you to cycling? When you say you fell in love with it at first sight, what was it about cycling that really connected you to it?
Different things at the time. I think one element is that it was the sense of freedom that you have when you ride a bike. When you are kids, it's you are on your own. You can decide where you go, and that was something really really great. That gave me a sense of self-confidence, taught me a lot, and also the fact that it's an individual sport. I wasn't too comfortable in team sports. I was a social kid, I think, but I like to do my own things. And when you're training and racing your bike, it's really about you. What you do will influence your performance. So that's probably another element that I really enjoyed straight from the beginning.
Do you remember the brand of your first bicycle?
I do. It was a beautiful steel bike, and the brand was Silo, which was a Swiss brand, it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but I have vivid memories of my first racing bike. Yeah.
What happened to that bicycle? Do you remember where its ultimate history ended up?
I would so much love to have kept this bike, and also other bikes I've had after that, but no, it just disappeared. I don't know. Did we give it to someone, but now I have my garage is remarkably. There's not so many bikes in cycling. There's this thing called N+1, where you always want another bike to do something else. I'm not too much into that. For me, I have two bikes actually, and I'm happy with them. It's more about the experience than the object actually.
Now, you're somebody who cycling has been a passion in many different aspects of your life. Let's start off talking about the racing side of it. You started off doing club races in Switzerland. Was that where you first started to get some experience when it came to racing a bicycle?
Yeah, I did that in the the youth categories in Switzerland between the age of 12 and 18. Raced at regional, national level. Actually, in Switzerland, the country is so small that basically any race is a national race, so which is great because you get to compete at a pretty high level almost all the time. So it's very inspiring and challenging. So I did that, and then like every kid, I had dreams of going further and further in the sport and maybe become a pro. So I tried when I was 19, 20, 21. I was racing at amateur level. When I was 22, I raced 1 year at elite level, which is the sub-pro category in Switzerland. But that was the year when I finished university. And at the end of my studies, I had to make a decision. What do I do? Do I try to keep racing and going, higher up or not. And at the time, I felt that, I loved the sports, I loved the racing, but I didn't really have the potential to become a pro. So decided to I don't know, at the time, for me it was over. I had finished my career. Now 25 plus years after, I'm smiling because because of course that was not the case, and there were many more things to come with regard to cycling. But yeah, I stopped racing at elite level, so that was my career.
And how competitive was it at that level that you were at, in terms of, you talked about not being good enough to get to the professional level? Did you have some kind of a gauge in yourself to say, well, I'm really close to being able to make it, or was it just a mountain too many to climb, excuse the pun?
Yeah, well, I think there was a physical element. I knew, seeing how hard I trained and seeing my results in the races, that if I kept training and progressing, I would become better, but not good enough to make the cut, because yeah, it was really competitive at the time. The level of racing was quite high in Switzerland, but the opportunities to become a pro were not that big, because there were not so many teams in Switzerland. You had to go abroad. So yeah, I mean, the pathway was quite narrow, I should say. But there was another element which I think was, played a bigger role, was just that the life, I don't think I was really attracted to the life of a pro athlete. When I was racing in this elite category, I started to realize that I loved the training. Working hard to reach a goal was fine, and I actually enjoyed that. But the race, the pressure of racing, the stress of racing, of being away from home, and all of that, I realized that was not really my thing. And actually, when you go from being an avid, high-performing amateur athlete going to being a pro, actually the difference is a lot about, it's a job, so you have to focus 200% on it, and it's your life revolves around it. And at the time, I realized that this was not what I wanted to do with my life. So maybe if you had asked me at the time, why aren't you trying to become a pro, I would have said, yeah, no, I'm not good enough. But in hindsight, I think it was more the lifestyle and everything that goes with it that were just not my thing.
There's cycling for recreational purposes, and there's racing like you were doing. Did you actually get to enjoy the scenery of the places that you were racing at, or was it all about the competition at that time?
It was a lot about the competition, because it was, I was into racing, and it was about the training. So yeah, but at the same time, I'm lucky to live in Switzerland, where it's a beautiful country, great roads, great places to go. So I was doing this in a really nice environment, and enjoying it. So there was this element, which now today is just central in my life as a cyclist, I should say. It's a lot about where I go and what I see, and a lot less about how fast I do it.
As you said earlier, your life definitely didn't end when it came to cycling, or cycling didn't end at that stage. You continued on in your life, and cycling became a very big part of your life future. Can you tell us what happened as far as getting into the administration side of cycling?
Yeah. So I live in Switzerland, and as I just said, I'm fortunate because it's a beautiful country, great landscapes and nature. But there was another very positive element about it, is that Switzerland, hosts a whole range of international sporting federation, including the UCI, which is the International Cycling Federation. So when I finished my studies at university and decided that I had, finished my cycling career, the next step was like, okay, what am I going to do now? I need to find a job. What kind of job? And I thought it would be great to find a job in sports. So I started to look for work, in Switzerland. And one day there was a job opening at the UCI. I applied. I was interviewed and I got the job. So within a month after finishing my studies, I was working for the International Cycling Federation, which at the time felt like the pinnacle of my professional career already. Mm-hmm. So it was quite amazing, because I thought I wouldn't be involved in the racing side of the sport anymore, and actually suddenly I was involved with the administration of the top end of the sport, and yeah, I was really grateful for the opportunity, which conditioned the next 20 years of my life.
You had an extensive career at the UCI. What were some of the roles and positions that you held there?
A lot of different things. I stayed for a long time. I stayed for 20 years, which I think nowadays is a very long career with one employer. But actually, it felt like I had a lot of different roles and positions, and even the organization changed a lot, because when I was hired, we were a small office of 9 people, and when I left, it was a big building with more than 100 employees, and the tasks changed a lot. And I started working on the administration of road cycling, which meant working on racing calendars, international calendars, registering teams, updating rules and regulations with different committees and commissions. I was also very lucky to be a technical delegate at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, and I have very, very fond memories of that time, working with people in Sydney and being part of this great adventure that the Olympics are. And then I moved down to the management of the UCI Pro Tour, which was the series of top races, including the Tour de France and many other races that was created by the UCI at the time. That was the mid 2000s. Did that for a few years, and then I got a great opportunity, which was to help the growth of the sport in what we could call the emerging markets of cycling. Places, countries where cycling was maybe not a very historic and mainstream sport, but were promising for the development of the sport worldwide. And it meant that for 4 years, my main project was to organize the Tour of Beijing. It was a UCI World Tour race, so top level with all the top teams in the world, and it was the first time a race of that level was organized in China. It was an amazing time. I met so many people, and was faced with so many exciting challenges, and that was something really, really interesting that I enjoyed. So yeah, for 20 years I had the same employer, but I did a lot of different things.
One of the many reasons I wanted to have you on the show today was because a lot of my guests come on the show and they travel around the world for specific reasons. They're either travel writers, they're photographers, it's linked to their job in some way. You're the first person I've had on the show that's actually been working within a sport that's traveled around the world, and you've seen the world, I guess, through a very unique set of eyes because you've worked within a sport that you're very passionate about. You've seen the evolution of that sport around the world, as you've just mentioned, in the developing nations and all the rest of it. How has that travel changed you as a person when you've seen not only the growth of the sport, but also the evolution of your own career through that travel experience?
Yeah, well, traveling has been central and has made me a different person, I think, well, that's not new, you know. I think, but I think one thing that is quite interesting about working in cycling is that it doesn't necessarily take you to the most famous places, and you get to experience life in different countries in a very interesting way. And let me take the example of the tour of Beijing. You know, when you travel to China for work or for for a holiday, you might spend a lot of time in the city of Beijing, you know. So if it's for work, you know, you're going to spend time in boardrooms, you know, and in the actual city, if you go as a tourist, you might go to the Great Wall of China and visit some attractions. With the tour of Beijing, most of the race would happen in the countryside. So I spent a lot of time in many different countries, in Europe, outside of Europe, but I was actually in places just with the locals, not so many travelers. It was in smaller towns, in the countryside, in the mountains, and I'm very grateful for that because yeah, it would have been really hard to do that in a different position.
I'm interested to know, when you started first travelling around the world in your capacity within the UCI, were you surprised about how in-depth the culture of cycling or professional cycling is around the world, with fans who just love the Tour de France and the classics and all these other races that we get to see on television? Was that something that surprised you about the width and breadth of cycling around the world?
Yes, definitely. And actually, I was lucky to be a witness of this development of the sport, because for a long time, the top ends of the sport, at least, was in Western Europe. You know, I started working for the UCI in 1994. At the time, I think 80% of the pro races, of the pro teams and the pro riders were in Western Europe. And actually, when I say Western Europe, it was France, Italy, Spain and Belgium. So I think half of the sport was 4 countries, 80% was Western Europe, and the rest was elsewhere, but it was not a lot at the time. Today, it's very different. I don't have figures in mind, but you see that the UCI World Tour, the first race is in Australia. There's the Tour Down Under. There's a race in China. There are races in North America. So it is a global phenomenon, definitely. But at the same time, you see that the grassroots element of the sport, you know, has been around for a long time. You know, the US racing scene has existed for a long time, and when I was, you know, growing up, you know, as a kid racing here in Switzerland, I didn't see that. I didn't understand that the sport was already happening everywhere. For me, it was the Tour de France, and that was it, you know. But actually, you realize that there's been a long tradition for the sport in many countries around the world, and that's absolutely fascinating.
I've got to share a little bit about my story in relation to cycling, because I left, as a New Zealander, I left Australia where I was working at the time to come and live in Belgium in the mid-1990s, and I was catapulted into this culture of cycling like I'd never seen in my life before. You know, almost on every street corner there was a bicycle shop with Eddie Merckx's poster hanging up in it, and cycling in Belgium is like, I think every child's first present is probably a bicycle, and the history and the culture of cycling is something you can't avoid in that country. And it wasn't long before I became addicted to the sport of cycling, because I lived in Belgium for 12 years, and here I was in the springtime standing on the side of the roads in the freezing cold weather, yelling at these cyclists as they were going up these cobblestone climbs on the Tour de Flanders, and it was just an extraordinary experience. Is that something that you've seen grown exponentially over the years as well, where more and more foreigners from outside of the traditional markets, particularly in Europe, have come and gravitated towards cycling around the world? And I'm talking about as spectators, not necessarily as participants, but as spectators.
Yeah, no, definitely, and you know, what you say about Belgium is so true, and I'm fascinated by the culture of cycling in that country, where people in the streets, they don't just know the big champions, they know all, you know, everything about the sport. And when you go to the Tour of Flanders, which was one of the biggest one-day races in the world, has a huge, very, very long tradition. You see the fans, you know, they know every rider by their name and their palmarès and everything. It's absolutely fascinating, and of course it's not the same around the world, but I do see the growth of the sport on the fan sides, the participation also. One example might be the UK, where the sport was not a mainstream sport. Cycling was not a mainstream sport maybe 20 years ago, and is now one of the most popular sports. And I mean, you're more familiar with Australia, New Zealand, but I've seen that, you know, happening as well, where you know, now you have the Tour Down Under and a few other races, you know, that attract, you know, the attention of the fans there, and there's so no, the popularity of the sport is growing, and that's fantastic.
In 2001, I decided to do something that was both very stupid but also life-changing. In the summer of 2001, I rode the entire Tour de France course through the summer, and I started off in Belgium because that particular year the Tour de France spent a few stages in Belgium, and I wanted to test myself both physically and mentally. So with a friend of mine and our partners at the time, we got into a mobile home, and the two partners gave us all the support in terms of massages and cooking our meals, and every day we rode a stage of the tour, although I must say it took us a lot longer than it took the professional peloton. But what I was fascinated by having this life-changing experience was, first of all, I got to see France on a bicycle, and to be up close in that with the people of France across all the different regions of France was as I say, it was a life-changing experience. What I'm fascinated to understand from you, somebody who's been on the inside of the organisation of the sport, is how do the towns get selected every year, that stage of the Tour de France, and how far ahead is that planned in terms of when those towns have to have everything ready for the amazing circus that is the Tour de France?
Well, first of all, congratulations on this great performance, because yeah, that's that is something, and yeah, I can't agree more with you. Cycling is such a great way of visiting a country, and it's you know, it's fast enough so that you see you know, different landscapes and things. It's faster than walking, hiking. but it's also slow enough that you actually experience the places you travel through. So it's absolutely amazing, and today it's a major part of why I love the sport and why I love cycling. But with regard to the Tour de France, yeah, how does a town become a start or a finish of a stage? Well, there's it's a bidding process, you know. So you just contact the Tour de France organization, which is a private company. It's actually a family-owned company called ASO. And they get, you know, all these applications from towns around France and even abroad, because, as you mentioned, sometimes the Tour de France starts in other countries and has stages in other countries. We had the tour in Switzerland not so long ago. So all these towns, they apply, and then they talk, they lobby, they network, and the people in charge of the Tour de France, they sit down with a big map in front of them and try to make sense of all this and come up with a course that makes sense from a sporting point of view, you know, with a good balance of mountain stages, flat stages and everything, and who is willing to welcome the starts and the finishes. And yeah, you know, I'm not very familiar with the exact nature of the process, but that's basically it. And so for a town, it could be years and years before they can actually have the tour. But yeah, it's quite an interesting process.
Before we move away from your role in the world of UCI and professional cycling, I guess I can't move on without talking about some of the controversy around that particular thing. And I guess in terms of a lot of people listening today to the show who are passionate cyclists will be fascinated to get some of your insights around particularly the professional level of cycling and some of the controversies that have been involved. We've seen for many years now the ugly side of professional cycling raising its head, and I'm talking, of course, about performance-enhancing drugs. During your time at the UCI, was it something that you were constantly combating from both a media perspective but also from a health perspective from the riders? Was it something that was always on the radar with you in the sport?
Yes, of course, because it's a huge issue for sports as a whole. How to keep, you know, the field fair and healthy for the athletes, and it's a very, very difficult battle, because you know, science comes up with a lot of wonderful substances that are going to heal people, but that are also performance enhancing, and there's always you know, a tendency to try and use this, and so sport has to deal with it. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go so well, and I think cycling had a very, very bad period because there was this thing called EPO, this blood you know, boosting substance that was undetectable for a long time, and no one could do anything against it. Sports couldn't do anything. Science couldn't come up with a test to detect it, and it meant that for a number of years, a culture of doping, you know, grew throughout all the sports. And to get rid of it, once you manage to detect the substance, is really, really difficult. So there's been some very ugly times. Now I'm out of this, so it's hard for me to comment, you know, how it's going. But as a fan, I hear from people in the sports that it's way better, and obviously I'm very happy with it, but it's a never-ending battle for sports to be as clean as they can, so that the game can be fair, and the athletes can do their job, you know, without risking their health.
I guess one of the things that really made me sit up and take notice of this particular issue was when I was doing my lap of France, as I call it, on my bicycle. And in particular, one day when I climbed up the Alpe d'Huez, and I realized how slow I was going compared to the professional cyclist. And I had that light bulb moment in my head. Is this humanly possible to actually go at the speed that they actually do up these hills, up these mountains, without any scientific assistance and support? And you're somebody who had a passion for racing a bicycle. Did you ever think back then at that time that you were up against people who were cheating the system?
Not when I was racing. This was not something that I was very much aware of, and so not when I was racing. But after that, I realized that was happening, and that was not that was not a great thing. But not when I was racing. No.
We'll move off from this, but I've got one last question related to it. Who did more damage to the sport of cycling, Oprah Winfrey or Lance Armstrong?
I have no idea, and that was such a messy time for the sport that there's a lot of people who did damage. There's a lot of people who were victims and things like that, It's very hard to say anything about that. I think we should just be happy that this time is over, and that fans today can watch the sports, feeling that the sport is in a much better state, I would say.
So you ended up leaving the UCI. What was the story behind that part of your life journey?
Yeah. 20 years is a long time. I spent a long time at the UCI, and but it didn't feel that long because I did so many different things. But all good things must have an end, and for me, it happened when a new president was elected. Because international sporting federation, are political organizations, and there's a board, there's a president. A new president was elected. That new president wanted to change a lot of things in the sports, and I was considered as someone from the old guard. So like 2/3 of the UCI staff at the time, I was, one way or another asked to leave the organization, and which meant that one day in October 2014, I found myself out of this organization that had, been my life, or a huge part of my life, for so long. So it was not so expected, because I'm a naive person and very trusting person, so I didn't really want to see signs that I was not wanted anymore in the organization. But that's what happened.
Now, a lot of the listeners to my show, they're quite interested in people that have gone through life-changing experiences, and a lot of people end up either doing something in the travel space and traveling around the world, or they follow a passion that they have, and that's exactly what you decided to do after you left the UCI. Can you tell us about how that passion of yours started and where it's evolved to this day?
I would love, first of all, to tell you that story of me having this plan in my mind to this project of mine to do my own things and start traveling the world, and that everyone should do the same, etc., etc. But that was not my story. For 20 years, I had been working in an office, essentially, and being employed, and suddenly I was outside of this comfortable office and had no idea what to do. And it was, I didn't know what to do. I had been in this environment for so long. The last time I had looked for a job was 20 years before, and basically my first application letter was successful, so I didn't really know where to start. At the same time, yes, I had ideas, and my passion for cycling was intact, and had evolved actually, because I was not a racer anymore, but I had started riding my bike also to meet people, to travel, and to also share the experience. That these were, things that had grown over the years. So I was like thinking, what can I do with that? Because I realized it was an opportunity to do something completely different, and I mentioned my wife Lily, and she was a huge supporter. She's American, I'm Swiss. So Swiss people are quite calm and reserved and careful. Americans, have a very different mentality. Anything's possible. So she pushed me to say, "Dude, what do you want to do?" And she was so supportive. So I was thinking, yeah, traveling. I had done some guiding for friends in the Dolomites, which is a beautiful region in the Alps in Italy, and so I was like, yeah, it would be great to try and have this, in my life one way or another, but didn't really know how to do it. And as always, when a door closes, another door opens, and it just happened that a guy living in my small, mountain town in Switzerland contacted me. We knew each other, from before a little bit, but said, "Hey, I have this idea of creating a company that would organize cycling holidays. Are you interested to talk? Because you might have some ideas." He didn't know that I had no job anymore. And we started talking, and within a few months he created the company and hired me to develop the company, really. So yeah, the next stage in the journey had started, and I was suddenly in charge of a cycling holiday operator.
How long did it take you to let go of the corporate identity that you must have built up over 20 years and to become at peace with your new adventure?
Most of it happened within seconds after I understood I was out of the organization. It was actually a big weight off my shoulders, because when you spend so much time in an organization, that it becomes kind of a prison. I think, whether you want it or not, whether it's a good or a bad environment, you stop thinking out of the box, and suddenly being outside of the box meant that it was actually, most of it was quite quick, but at the same time, being suddenly in a much smaller organization was not so easy. So it did take some time, but it was a very enjoyable process, I have to say.
So having been through that now, what piece of advice would you give to a listener who might have just found themselves out of their job through similar circumstances and are sitting here today thinking the whole world's come to an end? What piece of advice would you pass on to them?
Actually, as I said, a door closes, another door will open somehow, and but I think you don't need to receive that advice. When it happens to you, it's the process. You know that you have opportunities. Once you're outside, you see the opportunities. I think it's more difficult when you are inside. So. And I think I don't really have a lot of advice to share there, because someone decided I should be outside. I think what is way more difficult is when you are inside, is to make your own decision to to leave and face the unknown. When you are already outside in the cold, you have no choice. You have to find your own solutions, and you will find them. But when you are inside and it's nice and cozy, even if you're bored and some things you don't really like, it's really hard to open the door and get out in the cold, I think.
In English, we have a saying, a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think life is a succession of blessings in disguise. I think it happens every day, and you just deal with it. That's life.
So now you were thrust into this world of organising cycling tours. How different was that for you in terms of seeing both the world and cycling in through those eyes? Was it a different, slower pace for you to perhaps enjoy it a bit more?
It was. I think the only common denominator was cycling, because it was something completely different. It was a startup as opposed to an organization of 100 people. I was dealing with everything from marketing to accounting, logistics, and etc. and sales and everything. So instead of organizing processes, I was organizing holidays. So it was extremely different from many points of view. So it was actually a completely new life for me. The only thing that stayed is that I was dealing with the sports that I love.
So getting involved in taking people on cycling tours, what were some of the places, the geographical locations where you took people to, and where were the guests from? Where did people come from to take part in these tours?
So we organized tours in Europe, and mostly in France, Italy, and Switzerland when we started. And actually, interestingly, the DNA of the company was that our founder, Keith, he had ridden the whole route of the Tour de France, the Tour of Italy, and the Tour of Spain. So I'm sure you can relate to that.
1/3 of it I can.
and yeah, doing this, he had come up with this idea that it was an amazing experience, and that he wanted to share it with cyclists and offer it as an experience. So we did that, and I was mostly involved in doing this in Italy, which is an amazing country for cycling because there's a passion for the sport. The landscapes are absolutely amazing. I think there's not a region in Italy that's not good for cycling, and the culture is amazing, the food. So it's a true cycling paradise. But I'm also passionate about my country, Switzerland, which is also a great place to ride. So yeah, we organize cycling holidays mostly in these countries, and our guests came from all over the world, really. UK, US, Australia, quite a lot, Europe, but also Asia, and that for me was really interesting, because it was not just going to different places, but also taking people from all over the world to these places and sharing the experience with them, which is now at the center of my passion for the sport. Actually, it is about riding a bike, but it's a lot about meeting people and taking them to new places.
So people listening to you talking about these cycling tours, they probably are starting to think that they need to be of a certain weight and a certain physical fitness capacity to be able to go on these cycling tours. Is that the case, or is this something that just about anybody could manage if they were reasonably fit?
Well, there's a whole range of experiences. You could indeed ride the whole route of the Tour de France. That's one end of the spectrum, and you need to be extremely fit and have a very strong mind, I should say. But you could also spend a week riding in the Tuscan vineyards, riding, anything from 20 to 50 kilometers per day at a very leisurely pace, and stop for lunch in beautiful places, sample local wines, and enjoy the culture and the food and everything that the region has to offer. So I think the beauty of cycling is that, anybody knows how to ride a bike, and can enjoy a particular region on two wheels. So it's not about being Tour de France fit. No, it's about being willing to discover a new place.
You talked about your very first bicycle and that it was a steel frame bike. How has the technology of equipment over the years changed, and people that you are now taking on cycling tours, what kind of machines are they riding, and how does it differ from 20 years ago?
I think essentially it's not very different. It's still about using your own strength to move, and the shape of the bike hasn't changed much. And of course, a few things have improved. So when I started riding, I had, my bikes was heavier. The gears, changing gears was maybe a little bit more difficult. Now it's extremely easy. It's become electronic even. But I think the experience hasn't changed much. And to be honest, I'm not too much into this. I love to have a nice bike and that works well, but for me, cycling is really about the physical challenge, the places you go to, and it's not about having the most expensive and technologically advanced machine. It doesn't change the experience, really, I think.
We've seen an explosion of recreational cycling around the world, and as a result of that, we've also seen a lot of cities and countries investing a lot of money in bicycle infrastructure to support that. What are some of the places that you're aware of around the world, and they can be either in Europe or somewhere else, that have really done a fantastic job in creating cycling-specific infrastructure to support the growth of cycling?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think cycling is not just something you do for sports or to travel, but essentially I think cycling will save the world, because it's the solution to so many of the problems that our societies are facing in terms of health, of pollution, etc. And cities, have so much to gain from creating cycling-friendly environment and getting people out of cars and onto bikes, and so that's a wonderful opportunity. And you can see that some countries and cities have done their homework and are great places to live. I think Copenhagen in Denmark is a great example. Yep. So again, I don't have any figure in mind, but when you go there, everyone is on a bike. If you're in a car, you're in the minority, and it has completely changed the way people live in the city. So I think this is great. As a country, Holland is doing an amazing job, with so many bike paths and infrastructures. Everything is thought for cyclists, roundabouts, streets and everything. This is done for cyclists. and I think it's a wonderful thing. But the great thing is that many cities around the world are seeing the potential and are doing what it takes to change that. It's not easy to go from a car culture to a cycling culture, or a non-car culture where pedestrians and cyclists are the center of everything. But I think it's the future. We go nowhere with the car culture, and the cycling culture is one of the solutions to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Now it's time for a little bit of a curveball question to you. What do you actually eat when you ride, and what do you drink when you're on your bike?
What do I drink? Mostly water. And Switzerland is a wonderful country also because it's a land of water. So there are many lakes and rivers and actually fountains. So you can find water fountains virtually anywhere in the country. So you can fill your bottles. So that's probably what I drink most when I ride my bike. And what I eat, I like to eat real foods. So it can be some fruits, it can be some local specialties of the places I visit. I think it's also the beauty of cycling is that you can eat as much food as you want and sample the local specialties. So I would stop in bakeries to buy foods. Yeah, I think that's it. It's real food and if possible local food.
You're a father, a husband, a photographer, a writer, and an athlete. So tell me how you incorporate photography in your passion for cycling.
Yeah, photography came slowly into my life, and I think it started with the first smartphone with a camera that I owned, which must have been a BlackBerry at the time, so some time ago. And like everyone, I started taking pictures of things I was doing, and then social media came and was an opportunity to share it, and I find myself really enjoying it and doing more and more of it. And started following photographers that were doing wonderful things in sport, in the mountains, in cycling, and yeah, it became a passion. It was a new way of experiencing the sports, not just doing it and experience with your legs, with your lungs, and with your eyes, but also sharing it. And now it's become absolutely central because it grew and grew via social media, meeting photographers, becoming friends with photographers, seeing what they did, and somehow, over the years, I made contacts with brands, media, and started writing, sharing the experience, with images as well, and somehow today, it's becoming a huge part of my life and of my job to take pictures and share my cycling experiences through it.
It sounds to me that life after the UCI journey has become a very nice and happy place for you.
Yeah, it's a good life. It's a really really good life, and to be able to use all the experiences I have got over the years as a cyclist and traveling and meeting so many people and getting skills and things like that, and using them now is is a good place to be. So I think it's good to grow up and learn and being able to use it as you get older.
How would you summarize your life experience of travel through both the opportunity that you had at the UCI to travel the world and be involved in a professional sport and seeing the developments of all that to today where you're actually taking people on tours from all over the world in a completely different way in which you're connected to cycling? How has that journey of travel in your life changed you as a person?
It's made me the person I am. So yeah, traveling the world and meeting people, seeing places is an eye opener. Seeing how other people live, across the world is great. I think when you travel and meet new people, first you see the differences, and that's great to see how people do things differently in different parts of the world. I also think that's what's fascinating is that at the end of the day, we might be different, but we all do and want the same things, So we want, our family to be happy. We want to be happy with what we do. And so once you meet people, you first see the differences, but then you discover what's similar. And I think that's what's fascinating and very interesting. So that's one part, meeting new people, traveling to new places. But I also think that another element of the process is fascinating, is to come back home and see where you are with different eyes and appreciate the things that you have where you are. I live in the mountains. I'm lucky that from where I am as I speak, I have a 3,000-meter peak, in front of our house. So that's great. If I stay here for too long, I may tend to forget how lucky I am. If I travel and then come back here, I'm like, wow, these mountains are great, and these little things I have at home are so much fun and part of my life. So it helps to appreciate these things.
Would you say that you're at a stage of your life now through those experiences that you're appreciating the smaller things in life a lot more?
It's cliche, but yes, absolutely. I think, when you're young, you see the big things, and you want to change the world, and I think it's great because you need people with ambition, and you need people who want to change the world and manage to change the world. But as I get older, at least, I think the smaller things matter more and more than the bigger things. To appreciate small things around me and have a small impact on small things around me has become what makes me happy.
Two last questions before I let you go today. The first one is, every cyclist who's been competitive at some level has their favourite ride that they go out and do, their favourite route. What's yours? Where is it?
Wow, that's a big question, because I'm like those, I'm like a dog that's having his best day ever every day. So every bike ride is my best bike ride ever. So even my local loop, and so it changes. You ask me the question one day, it's going to be one loop. It's another is going to be another loop. So there's so many great places to ride, but maybe one that's...
Is there a particular climb that you like doing?
There's this climb which is actually quite close to where I live, which is called the Col du Sanech, and is absolutely fascinating because it starts in the vineyards, so in the very low part of Switzerland, the vineyard of the Rhone Valley, and it finishes. You are very close to a glacier. I mean, you used to be at the foot of the glacier, but with the climate change, the glacier is quickly receding, but you see that glacier, and it takes, I don't know, it's 1,700 meters of climbing, so it's quite a big climb, but it's a whole journey, you know, from the vineyards to the glacier, basically, and you see villages, you see forests, then you're above tree line in a very alpine landscape, and it's an amazing climb. The road is very small, it's very quiet, because it's technically a dead end, so that's not much traffic, but in summer there's a cable car that operates on the other side of the mountain, so you can actually hop onto the cable car, you know, hook your bike outside of the cable car and do this great cable car ride down the mountain on the other side, and keep riding and make it a loop. And I can actually do that from my house. It's a day trip, but it's as best as it can get around here. So I have to do it, you know. I do my annual pilgrimage to this climb, but a year where I do it several times is a good year, definitely.
Fantastic. Now, my last question for you today is, I realise that the ski season is rapidly coming to your doorstep, but are there any plans to go riding on your bicycle over the Christmas period?
I love to ride my bike, but I go with the flow, you know, and again, I'm so lucky to live in a place where I can be outside all year round and have so many different activities. So the last few days have been quite mild and dry, so I was really happy to ride my bike late in November, which is not very usual, but as soon as the snow comes and stays, I'm on my skis. I love skiing. It's so much more fun to ski powder than to try and ride a bike when the weather is miserable. So if there's a good day, you know, anytime during winter and it's dry and I want to ride my bike, I go out on the bike. But if it's a good powder day, you'll find me on the slopes. On my skis, going up and down the mountains. I do ski mountaineering, which is an amazing activity. So, you know, it can happen that my bike is in the garage and I forget about it for 3 months, and that's fine.
Alain, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on my show today, and thank you for talking about a whole range of different subjects and giving my listeners an insight to your passion of cycling, but also some of the many lessons you've learnt throughout your career so far and travelling the world and meeting people from all different nationalities. It's been a great insight for many of us, and I really appreciate your time you've given us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Would be happy to come back anytime.
Great. Thank you very much. My guest today has been Mr. Alain Rumpf from Switzerland. I hope you enjoyed that insight to the world of cycling at a professional level, but also what Alain endured in terms of going around the world and seeing the expansion of a massive sport, but also from a recreational point of view, and now offering cycling tours throughout Europe. Fantastic story. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel, just head over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of our previous episodes there. You can download them at iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and a host of other locations that are all listed on the website. Okay, that's it for me for this particular episode. Until we meet again, my name is Mark Philpott. I wish you all a very happy bon voyage.